back and try this again. I'm going to briefly go through the Truck Safe, Tank Safe, Site Safe product offering. Truck Safe is for our trucks on the road, any hazardous goods that they carry, and non-hazardous goods for items where, because we have a truck that has a fuel tank and a hydraulics and engine oil, we do recommend that you take out side tank cover, or make sure that you have side tank cover when your guys are transporting non-hazardous goods. On our Tank Safe side, we turn around and we have above ground and underground tanks that we will ensure. These turn around and do it for anything that has diesel, fuel, oils, anything like that that would be in there. Chemicals, any chemicals that are also in there. On the Site Safe side, this is for your factories and your warehousing that either manufacture chemicals or anything that is hazardous, or turns around and stores anything. So your warehouses that, and a lot of our guys turn around and carry general goods, logistics companies, and they need to store them in order to turn around and transfer them to the next portion of the trip. So we suggest that Site Safe cover is also taken out for your hazardous goods. So what is covered in terms of the policy? We cover first and third party in our policy. This is not your normal iTOO. iTOO normally turns around and does most of our products are third party, except for our art and our drones. And the reason for this is that the first party, we would turn around and cover the actual spillage of that the first party has had in terms of their vehicle. Plus then the third party portion of it is if it turns around and affects any third party, the spill either going into a stream or going into another person's premises and affecting them. So we have the different emergency cleanup response costs, and this is really just to mitigate the loss so that it doesn't spread any further. We have our cleanup itself. We have the decontamination and rehabilitation. So this is if around the premises where the incident has occurred, the soil is contaminated, we turn around and make sure that it is cleaned up, rehabilitated back to where it was before the accident happened. In terms of our spillage during onloading and offloading, this does happen, unfortunately. We do have, when your guys are stopped at a depot, they're busy taking the goods off on a forklift. Unfortunately, the lift shifts and there's a spill. This is also covered in terms of our policy with loading and offloading, as well as if the client is sitting at a depot waiting for his turn to offload the stuff and he sits stationary and there's a shift in the load, or he isn't aware that something within the load spilled at the time, this is also covered in terms of the policy, up to a maximum of a vehicle standing for 72 hours. We have a small driver death benefit section of our policy of 15,000 Rand in the event of a driver dying while he is transporting his load. Then we have what we call a passive right and strike. So what we found is when there was all the strikes and right actions down in Durban on the N3, Sasria turned around, and I know they did take a long time, and I do say it tongue-in-cheek that they turned around and paid out on these claims, but they did turn around and pay out on the assets as well as the goods that were conveyed, but they didn't turn around and cover any of the environmental impact for that occurred while they were doing the rights and strikes. If you turn around and look at your right and strike sections on your Sasria policy, there is no extension for debris, right and strike pollution, environmental pollution cleanup. So we came in then with a product called passive right and strike, and this will cover you in the event of a right or strike if there is any spillage specific from that. In the last week, we actually had one where there was protest action in informal settlement, and there was a truck driver that was driving down to go and deliver some goods. He saw that the road had been blocked in front of him. He tried to turn around in the road, do a U-turn. Unfortunately, he was shot at. No injuries to him, but injuries to his vehicle and to his side tank of his petrol, which spilt all over the road. He was lucky enough to be able to get out of the situation as soon as possible, and actually was thankfully enough to turn around and take a piece of soap and actually stick it in the tank to stop the spread of the pollution condition. And when it comes to our third party side, we would also turn around and respond the same as the first party to your emergency response to mitigate the spread going further. Cleanup costs on that area. If there was any bodily or injury or property damage, we would turn around and cover that. And then if there is, if the area has been closed off due to it, we do also cover the increased cost of working and business interruption on those covers. So now I come to the part that I'm sure you all go, oh, please don't make me fill out another proposal form. But unfortunately, we unfortunately need to turn around and have some underwriting criteria in place. We can turn around and do an indication, a non-binding indication subsequent to going on cover, but when we do go on cover, we would need a full proposal form completed with a claims history. So what would we need in order to give an indication quote? We would turn around and need the insured's name, of course. How many vehicles do they convey? And we would like a split on this, please. We would like to know their hazardous and their non-hazardous. As I said prior to this, the non-hazardous, because they may turn around and only have 20 vehicles in their fleet that carry hazardous goods, but they have a fleet of 50. So would they want the other 30 covered for side tank cover only in the event of a spill from their gearbox oil or their fuel? And then also a split between the LDVs and the HCVs. And the reason why we ask for this is HCVs turn around, first of all, and carry less fuel, so the side tank cover is less. They turn around and carry less goods, so the capacity of what they're carrying would be a lot less. And also we rate LDVs and HCVs differently. Commodities, this is an important one for us to note. We need to know the different commodities that they transport. We would like, if you say chemicals, be a bit more specific. There's multiple chemicals that can be transported. The application and the cleanup of these chemicals is very, very different for the different chemical commodities. How we rate the commodities is that there are what we call UN codes. So these are standard international codes for hazardous chemicals. Each aspect of a product that you turn around and transport has what they call a TREM code that goes with it. So the UN code will match back to that. So we just need to know that if there is a spill, we know exactly what commodities are in there that we can turn around and manage the spill correctly. We also would like to know the territories. Do they only transport in South Africa? Do they transport cross-border? If they transport cross-border, where do they go within our South African territories? Our territories are sub-Saharan. So we would just like to make sure that we have the correct split. If they do 90% of their business cross-border and only 10% here, that also affects our rating criteria. So we would like that information. On our limits of indemnity, we would like to know what kind of limit are they looking for. A lot of the guys will turn around and have a contract in place where a minimum of 10 million is required on some of the stuff that they transport. Others will turn around and say, you know what, for this, it's a small application, we only need R1 million cover. We also have instances where we've got LDVs and HCVs that they want covered. On the LDVs, they only want a limit of R1 million, but on the HCVs, they want 5, 10, 15, 20 million rand cover. Our minimum on our HCVs is R1 million cover, and our maximum currently is 50 million each and every claim. And then if possible, and I know this isn't always the case when you turn around and you're going up against a client, when the client has turned around and asked you for, and you're not the holding broker, to turn around and get a quote for them, a comparative quote for them, if you can give us some type of indication on what claims they've had. We know this isn't going to be 100% correct, but if they can give an indication to say, you know what, we've had 3 big ones, or we had 2 smaller ones, that just helps us in our underwriting criteria. This is just to turn around and provide you with a non-binding indication. As we said before, we would require a fully completed proposal form prior to going on risk, as well as claims history in order to incept the policy. So what triggers an environmental liability claim? Well, it's anything really. It can be the smallest thing, but what the main concept of a trigger is a spillage specifically of goods transported. So it could be a spillage of the goods itself, it could be a spillage of the tank, it could be hydraulic fluids that come out of it. It could be goods that are stored and unfortunately in a storage rack in a factory, and the storage rack shelf collapses. And this turns around and impacts into a claim. All these things will be covered and triggered by a spillage of a good that's either transported or stored, which results in a pollution condition. So yes, along with these triggers are a few acts that South Africa has, and I have to say that South Africa is one of the biggest and best acts when it comes to pollution liability. We have what they call the NEMA Act. The NEMA Act turns around and says that anybody that's in the chain of transporting those hazardous goods, be it from collecting, storing it in a warehouse overnight or at a depot site, transporting it the next morning, every person in that chain and the owner of those goods has an overarching duty to make sure that the environment is protected and that the spillage is cleaned up as per the rules and regulations of the NEMA Act. We also have the Department of Environmental Affairs that sit within the environmental liability space. We have seen quite a bit in recent months of spillages on the side of the road where it has affected a third party, and we have had to go in and do rehabilitation of the land, that the Department of Environmental Affairs are there quite quickly. They're very active on the site. They are asking for soil assessments, a lot more soil assessments. We're finding that it takes a little bit longer in getting the site cleaned up because they are very stringent on their regulations at the moment. And then, of course, we have the Road Traffic Act, which is part of the motor side of the risk, that the vehicle has to be in a roadworthy condition. You have to have the correct licenses in place in order to turn around and transport the goods. You have to have a PRDP-D for the hazardous goods, and you need to turn around and make sure that your vehicle is roadworthy. So now I'm going to turn around and hand you over to Zinhle, who's in our claims division. Zinhle started off with us in our grad program just over a year and a half ago. She then turned around and came into our claims division. We're very happy to have Zinhle part of our team. And Zinhle, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, and good morning once again to everyone who has joined us today. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So as Shelley previously mentioned, the NEMA Act aims to ensure the protection and the conservation of our environment. Now, in the event that the policy is triggered by a spillage leading to environmental pollution or contamination, such an instance can have severe adverse effects, not only on the environment, but also possibly on third-party property. That is why it is of utmost importance that we are notified immediately of these instances by having our insureds call our Spill Safe hotline, which I'm going to ask Shelley to just put on our screen now. This is basically to ensure the immediate and relevant assistance to our insureds. So what would happen is when the insured calls the hotline, they would be required to provide certain information, some of which would include the company details as well as the location of the incident. Now, in these circumstances, we do appreciate a PIN location so we can know exactly where the incident took place. Some other information which would be required to be provided would include the type of product spill, and if the product was being transported, how it was packaged, as well as the volume of the spillage. So following the insured's response to these questions, and once the details have been verified, EFI Global, who are our incident managers in these incidents, will then be notified, and they would then immediately dispatch the quickest and most appropriate emergency response team from our panel of service providers. Once they've dispatched the service provider, they would then immediately attend to the spill. So the spill is attended to in 3 phases. The first phase is basically emergency response, which is basically the containment of the spillage, so to prevent it from spreading, obviously, as well as from causing any further damage to the environment or even third-party property. Once the pollution condition has been contained, they then move on to the second phase. And the second phase is the actual cleaning up of the spillage. Now, I would like to take a moment to basically just emphasize the relevance of EFI Global in this process. So not only does EFI Global dispatch the emergency response according to the incident category type, and what I mean by that is that these incidences can either be a category A, category B, or category C incident, depending on the volume of the spillage or the type of product spill. So not only do they dispatch the relevant service provider, but they also assist in managing the entire process. So they assist by ensuring that the correct cleaning methodologies are being followed by the service providers. And in an instance where the incident is notifiable under Section 30 of the NEMA Act, they would then assist with notification to the relevant legal authorities. They also assist with getting the necessary sign-offs, as Shelley mentioned, as well as the necessary certificates, for example, a disposal certificates, which would basically state that the waste which was spilled has been correctly cleaned and safely disposed of. So once we've had phase one, which is the emergency response and the cleanup, we then move to phase 3 of the process, which is the rehabilitation phase. Now, this phase basically involves the actions of repairing and restoring the actual affected environment with the goal of returning it to a healthy and functional state again. So this would include the retarring of the road surface, or even replacing the actual soil that was affected. Once we've cleaned up the spill and we've received the necessary reports and invoices from our service providers on our agreed rates, we would then attend to the necessary payments. So although my summary of the claims process was exactly that, a very brief summary, the entire process can be long and costly. Hence, it's very crucial that the correct notification procedure is followed. This is to ensure that a 30,000 Rand claim doesn't escalate into becoming a 300,000 Rand claim. So at the end of the day, I think it's all our responsibility to take care of our environment. And so I do hope that all our brokers on the call today and our insureds will have our spill safe number on their speed dial going forward. And that's it for me. Thank you, Shelley.
Thanks, Zinhle. That is great. So, guys, I'm sure you've heard from Zinhle now the claims process and what needs to be done. We can't emphasize enough, it has to be through to the 24-hour Spill Safe hotline. And you have heard no claim form, which is wonderful. So, yes, proposal form, unfortunately, but claim form, we've tried our best to turn around and assist there. Yes, next I'd like to turn around and introduce you to Willie Buitendag. Willie is from EFI Global, that is a division of Sedgwick. Willie has extensive knowledge in the emergency spill cleanup side of environmental liability, as well as not just environmental liability, but in all aspects of emergency response and spillage. He turns around and has a higher qualification and has the hazmat 427, is it, Willie?
472.
472 qualification. Willie's going to be discussing some of the market trends with you today. Welcome, Willie. We're really happy to have you part of our team, and we thank you for everything that you put into making sure that all our claims are sorted. I know Willie's had a horrendous long weekend with quite a big claim. When I spoke to him yesterday, he didn't know if it was Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. So we're really happy that he was able to come and present with us today. So over to you, Willie.
Great. Thank you very much, Shelley. I just want to confirm that I'm clear, that everybody can hear me. Are you happy with the sound? Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to maybe share a few of the market trends. And in the last few years, I would say probably 1.5 to 2 years now, I think the market trend has basically been determined by the shortcomings of our government in the form of supplying electricity. And that has, over the years now, opened up doors for the small, medium enterprise developers and guys to establish businesses in the form of alternative power supply. Now, this generally comes in two different forms. Number one is your solar and solar systems and installations, and the need for these lithium-ion batteries to store alternative power generation for use later on. The other one is the installation of generators. A lot of businesses has realized the impact and has been forced to install generators and generator systems. But what they couldn't do is actually install bulk storage facilities to actually supply these systems. So what has subsequently happened is that the market has opened up for smaller guys, dealers, diesel dealers, to basically supply diesel directly to the generators. And this now resulted in all kinds of tanks and pump systems being manufactured by manufacturers and putting it out in the market for the guys to purchase. They secure it to trucks or buckies or trailers, and they then tow it on the highways. Now, when it comes to the legislation around these operations, it's sometimes difficult because your diesel has got an exempted quantity according to your national standards, your SAN standards, where the exempt quantities for diesel is 1,000 liters. So you can transport diesel on the road without having to label your vehicle. Your driver doesn't need to be trained. Your vehicle doesn't need to be registered as a dangerous goods carrier. As long as it's just under 1,000 liters, they can transport it. The kind of worm that this opens up is that 1,000 liters of diesel can cause havoc on a road and on a road surface, and it can cause havoc in the environment. The pollution ratio, and I'm sure you guys have heard this already from the Rose Foundation's adverts and so, that hydrocarbons has got a pollution ratio of 1 to 1 million. So 1 million liters of diesel or hydrocarbons will contaminate, 1 liter will contaminate 1 million liters of water. And that would be your contamination ratio. So if this 1,000 liters ends up somewhere in a stream or a dam and pollutes the area, you will have millions and millions of liters of water contaminated. The other risk that we sit with ultimately is the slippery and dangerous road conditions that is created with a diesel spill. Diesel is also considered to be a combustible material, not a flammable substance, but under the correct circumstances and conditions, diesel has got the ability to actually ignite. We've had an incident a few months ago on William Nicol, on the N1 close to William Nicol, where a guy was towing a diesel Bowser, and this Bowser was labeled and marked as it was containing 2,000 liters of diesel. And when this vehicle or when this trailer started snaking behind the LDV that was towing it, the vehicle, the driver lost control. The vehicle and the trailer overturned, and the friction of the trailer and the metal on the road surface actually ignited the diesel that then came through the latch on the top of the tank. And it ignited the diesel, and we had a huge fire on the highway. It ran off the highway and along the boundary fences of the properties next to the highway. And that impacted the environment as well as the stormwater system next to the highway. Not long after that, we had another little one, more or less at the same spot. It's got quite a bit of a downhill, and the guys tend to make a few mistakes over there because the drivers that they get to drive these vehicles aren't familiar with towing trailers, and some of them are not registered as dangerous goods drivers. So what I want to get to is that The legal compliance of the companies that generally starts this, because they realize that this is quick money and it's not going to be a long-term thing. It may be a long-term thing, depends on how the government is going to sort out the load shedding issues, which doesn't seem to be very quickly. But this is going to be an ongoing scenario that's going to present itself. If you have a look at the picture, just the picture that that's on the slide over here, you already see here that the guys are using IBC tanks, it's an intermediate bulk container. It's a plastic tank. These tanks are mainly manufactured to actually carry chemicals. Now, the thing is that there's not really a manufacturer in South Africa for these tanks. So most of the tanks that is actually in South Africa is actually imported tanks. It's recycled tanks that has come in from overseas, from Europe and the US. And these tanks have got a lifetime. They can't be exposed to sunlight. There's many of these tanks where we've in the past walked past, and if you just push hard on the plastic because it's been exposed to the sun, you actually push a hole right through it. So the tanks are also, because they're manufactured of plastic, it's not the preferred method of actually storing a combustible or a flammable liquid, because you can't dissipate static electricity out of this. So your risk while filling this tank or discharging from this tank is actually high when it comes to static discharge and ignitions that can take place. Now with diesel, there's less of a risk of ignition. However, the guys ignore the fact that they can't put petrol in there, because if diesel can go in, their brains tells them they can put petrol in there as well. And they start transporting petrol in these tanks, which is highly flammable and it can be detrimental. If you've got a flash during a delivery or a flash during filling up this tank, it can cause serious injury and damage to property and people's lives. So the spillages that comes from this happens at the loading point. It happens at during transport, these vehicles overturning, losing control of the vehicle. The driver rolls the vehicle, involved in third-party vehicle accidents, where impact on these tanks actually destroys the tank, and you've got a huge spill. You've got stormwater drainage systems in towns and on the highways being affected. And the moment on hydrocarbon incidents, a spillage goes over 200 liters and it starts impacting environmental pathways in the sense of stormwater drains. It goes into the soil. Then these types of incidents, needs to follow the NEMA Section 30 protocol, which means that these types of incidents must be reported. The incidents, there's documentation to be filled in. There's a flash report or alarm report that needs to be sent through to the department. There's a Section 30 report that needs to be submitted within 14 days. And those are the types of reports we assist the insured with then to get this incident registered. If they don't register the incident and the department get to hear about it later on, or the products doesn't get cleaned up and it enters sensitive areas and pollutes, and members of the public or third parties then reports it to the Department of Environmental Affairs, the person that caused this incident or that was responsible for this incident will then be held liable, number one, and can be criminally charged under, number one, the Constitution of South Africa, as well as then the National Environmental Management Act, NEMA, or the National Water Act, depending on what was contaminated. And the fines for not responding to these types of incidents is first warning is R1 million or a year in prison, and with failure to act consistently on these things can lead to a 5-year or R5 million fine. So it's quite important that when you guys do get clients that wants to be distributors, field distributors, and that is responsible for driving these vehicles on the roads, that they still comply with legislation, that their guys are still trained, and when the policies gets taken out, that that they make sure. There's nothing more frustrating having a client that has got an insurance policy or that wants an insurance policy and now gets one from you, but he's not operating legally. And there's an incident, he's going to expect the policy to respond, and everything then gets found out afterwards that non-compliance is actually going to repudiate the claim. And that puts a lot of frustration, a lot of pressure on the brokers, it puts it on the insurers, it puts it on everyone. But we just need to make it clear that legal compliance is very important and correct design. Everything, just like in the solar industry, where everything happened quite quickly, there's hundreds of thousands of guys that's installing solar systems and solar panels and so on, but there's still no standard for the installation of these things. And in the market, we are picking up a heck of a lot of fires and damages caused to properties due to incorrect and substandard equipment or installations. And that is exactly the same as what we've got then for the for the fuel industry when it comes to transporting diesel for generators.
Willie, Willie, if I turn around and listen to what you're saying now, I mean, we're having these guys that are sole proprietors that are now going out and starting to do maintenance on generators, so they carry petrol on the back of a bakkie in order to maintain that generator. The spills that you're talking about now can go into hundreds of thousands of rands. So for a guy that's a one-off man that turns around, manages these things, it's quite a lot to take out of his cash flow if he hasn't got that kind of cover in place.
That is correct, Shelley. If I've got to just take the last few weeks, if you look at a reportable incident, before you actually look at the cleanup costs of an incident, just to meet your legal obligation and to get all your legal compliances in place, to meet the standards of the Department of Environmental Affairs, to sign the site off, because you will never ever release liability from that site or get clearance from that site if the department don't issue you a clearance certificate or a clearance letter. Now, in order for the process to go through all the steps to get your Section 30 signed off, is going to probably cost you anything between 50 and 100,000 Rand. So that already is a given. Then you've got to come back and you've got to then look at the cost of the actual cleanup and the rehabilitation that's taking place. So even on a small volume, you must remember that the cost doesn't always, the cost is not always determined by the volume that's spilled. The cost is actually determined by the impact of the product on people's property, the environment, and people's lives, and so that is what determines the cost of the cleanup and the intervention that is needed. So 1,000 liters of petrol and 1,000 liters of diesel has got completely different risks and gets cleaned up completely differently, and has got different ingredients and components that's got impacts on water, soil, and air. When you start looking at, if you start comparing 1,000 liters of petrol or diesel against 1,000 liters of sulfuric acid or nitric acid, there's a huge difference between the treatment and the handling, as well as the equipment and PPE that is required. But there's also risks that needs to be addressed during the cleanup processes, specifically when it comes to long-term risks. So if you're dealing with potential groundwater pollution because you've got shallow water, the impact that your petrol and diesel has got in comparison to what your acid has got is completely different. Your acids tends to start mobilizing metals, and that metals will end up in your groundwater. And when you start using groundwater with metals in it, you can get very sick, because metals in the body, like chrome and zinc and those types of things, has got negative impacts on your organs. So the cleanup of environmental incidents is based on risk, and that is why there's a whole panel of guys that gets involved when the environmental part of it is actually activated, in the sense of environmental scientists, geohydrologists, wetland specialists, and through all of this, we've got to clear that incident at the end of the day to completely remove liability, because liability can sit on an incident for years and years. I mean, there's products that can be transported on vehicles and so on, that can have impacts on people's lives only in 20 or 30 years time. And we're looking here at products, for instance, like PCB oils, and we're looking at products like asbestos, which can only surface or start showing its impacts on people's lives after 10 years or 20 years. So yeah, that is the key thing, that when it comes to these types of incidents, the quicker we can get the incident reported, the quicker we can respond to the incident, the quicker we can get the incident cleaned up, the less the impact. Smaller impact will result in a smaller cleanup cost. We sometimes find that incidents happens at 12 o'clock in the evening, and we only get the call at 7 o'clock in the morning. So the timeline where this product, where we had time to mitigate the risk and to keep the incident as small as possible, has now lapsed. We basically get there to deal with the incident in the way that we find it, because the product is not flowing anymore. It's now actually sinking. It's now it's absorbed by the soil, and it is now going to depth. So the only thing we can do now is act on what we need to do to minimize the risk of it reaching groundwater.
Yeah.
So the risk is there. We need to mitigate it, and we've got to clean it up. And at the end of the day, the only guys that will give us clearance on this is if we can satisfy the Department of Environmental Affairs or Water Affairs that the activities that we've implemented, the methodologies we've used, and the analytical results that we give them back as actually indicates that the site has been cleaned up.
Okay. I know, Willie, you and I have spoken a few times in the last few weeks around maintenance and related claims that are coming out of the market. I mean, we know our economic climate isn't great. We know that our fuel prices are going up. We know that there's a lot of things that are impacting the economy at the moment. And we are starting to see that maintenance is a concern. What are your thoughts on maintenance and how any related claims, environmental liability related claims?
Yes. There's the trends on maintenance is always ultimately, in order to run a successful business, especially when it comes to transport, but it's not just in transport. We also see it a lot in plants, is that with the increase in fuel prices, the increases in material prices, steel prices going up, the price of plastic, which is related basically to the fuel price. Funny enough, all of these goes up the moment the fuel price starts fluctuating up, and tends to not come down when the fuel price does come down, which is a little bit concerning. But all of this results in higher operating and maintenance costs to companies. Now, the thing is that if all companies are doing business to make money, to support the business. Now, there's a few critical things that needs to be implemented or that needs to be paid initially. And that would be the guy's interested in keeping his vehicle, so he's going to pay his installments. He's going to pay his drivers, and he's going to pay his staff, and whatever is necessary to keep his business running. When it's going to come to the maintenance part, we find a lot that what the guys do is they neglect maintenance a little bit to show some cost savings. And the concern on that is that bad maintenance on vehicles has got direct impacts on environmental incidents, and with a failure of doing maintenance, some legal responsibilities has now been neglected, and the result in that is a difficult situation again, where he's got an incident, he thinks he's got insurance, he's not complied with the law, and now there's a repudiation of claim. And the problem that we sit with is unhappy people right across board and so on, and we can't control that. But this is the reality. We've picked up spillages along the road where gearboxes has disintegrated, where the oil is so thick that no absorbent material will even pick it up. So it's already gone sludge inside. We've picked up hydraulic systems where there's no physical damage, so nothing damaged the hose, nothing has actually punctured or got pinched during the operation process or so to justify a sudden accidental incident. It basically comes back to a very old, cracked, badly maintained hydraulic hose that works under pressure and could have gone at any time, and now it's gone. And that is maintenance issues. If the hoses are maintained, you shouldn't have a hose like that on your vehicle, and that poses huge risk to environmental claims. So maintenance has definitely got a huge impact, and is we've seen it more and more. Probably the last month there were 3 or 4 incidents that was reported where no sudden accidental damages could be explained. It was all related to maintenance and maintenance related damages that was caused.
I know that you have attended to a claim for us on a maize that was carried. So in terms of maize, we don't believe that it's a hazardous good. But unfortunately, when the tipper tank was tipping out the maize out of it onto the conveyor belt to go into a silo, the hydraulics failed on the tipper, which contaminated the goods. So that also could be deemed as maintenance. You know, it could be that they haven't maintained it, or it could be just a sudden and accidental that unfortunately it is what it is and it happened. But yeah, we are seeing those claims coming through more and more. I mean, we know also the increasing consumables, which you have spoken about already. We've had the discussions around that, plastic, and we seem to think, okay, well, what's that got to do with an environmental liability claim? But like we've spoken before, plastic gets put down on the ground in order for them to turn around and take that contaminated soil and pack it on to clean the site. Plastic could be in your PPE, it could be in anything that you turn around and do. Our fuel costs in order to get the guys out to site to go and clean up that thing, everything is rising prices, which at the end of the day affects not just the insurers, but it affects the end user, because their insurance premium could go up because of the rising prices. They could, I mean, their contracts at the moment, logistics guys turn around and put their contracts in place at the beginning of the year for a year, or sometimes they do a 2-year contract. They don't know in that time whether the fuel price is going to go up. Nobody knew that Russia was going to go to war. Nobody knew that COVID was going to be something that would impact all of us. So these things do play a pivotal part in cleanups and how vehicles are looked after in order to turn around and make sure that these spills are less frequent in terms of maintenance side of it and less costly.
Yeah, that's true.
My last thing I wanted to chat to you about is a very interesting one that came out from a discussion that we'd had on one of our monthly meetings, was around impersonating cleanup providers. Would you like to share some of the experience that you had on that?
Yeah, we attended to there was a request from a insurance company, a cross-border insurance company, which were carrying an iTOO environmental policy, and it was a client or an insured, which was involved in an accident in South Africa up in the northwest. It was quite a serious accident where one vehicle, one HCV went into the back of another HCV, and the driver was entrapped in the vehicle. And during this accident, ultimately, there was a spillage. The engine oil and the diesel from the side tank spilled out onto the road surface, and various service providers responded to this incident. Now, the emergency services in the Northwest is a provincial service. They've got fire and rescue. The ambulance service actually responds from quite a distance, so I think it's Rustenburg or so, and they had a few kilometers to travel. But in the town, there is a private ambulance operated by two gentlemen that attends to these incidents and does some of the transport of private patients to hospital and treats patients then on accident scenes. Now, Bakwena is also the manager of the N4 highway. They've got the maintenance contract, and these guys have also got a little bit of a mandate to do some cleanups where there is spillages from trucks, where the owners or the roads, the owners doesn't take responsibility for the cleanup themselves. Bakwena will then be contacted, and they can then do a little bit of a road cleanup, but they tend to stay away from any environmental cleanup. So as long as it's still on the road surface, they will apply some absorbents, make the road safe for other road users. The moment it goes off the road onto the soil or the shoulder of the road, they don't want to touch that incident. So in this case, what happened is that the incident or the spill remained on the road surface. Bakwena sent out a team, and these guys then, after the accident was cleaned, was cleared, all the vehicles were towed away. They came in and they did a bit of a cleanup on the road surface and removed all of the vehicle parts that remained in the area. The driver passed away in the vehicle while emergency services were on site. They couldn't get him cut out quickly enough out of the vehicle, but eventually the body was removed, and the emergency services or the fire department rescue service eventually got the vehicle removed from him in order to get the body out. The sad thing over here is that we received this call after the whole incident, probably a month after the incident occurred, and we were asked to please evaluate it, and we got our hands on all of the documentation. And looking through the invoices and trying to determine a fair cost to all of the services that was rendered on site, because the whole incident generated 4 invoices. The one was for emergency services fire department. The other one was for emergency services rescue department. Then there was an invoice from a private ambulance service, and there was an invoice for the spill cleanup from a spill cleanup company that none of us has ever. I haven't heard about them. I don't know them. I was triggered and very interested to find out who these guys were, because we didn't know about them. On a further investigation during this whole process, we then approached the emergency services in the Northwest and asked them about this incident, and they were able to identify and agree that they did turn out to this incident. But confronting them about their costs on this incident, they said to us, but they don't send invoices. The emergency services in the Northwest province is a free service. And when they turn out to incidents, the fire department don't charge, the rescue department don't charge, as well as the ambulance service, the provincial ambulance service in the province don't charge for services. And we then presented them with the invoices, and they sent us back examples of their invoices that they would send out, and it was completely different. Looking at the design of the invoices, it was all designed on the same platform. The only things that changed basically was the logos of the various services that was different. Coming back to the cleanup company, we found that the cleanup service provider that was impersonated their invoice was designed on exactly the same format. Again, it was just logos, dates, telephone numbers, and so on that was changed. And when we started calling telephone numbers, we managed to get to guys with the same names and surnames. So it was all numbers shared within a company. Now,
that's crazy.
we went to Bakwena, and Bakwena confirmed that they actually did the cleanup of the spill on the site. And they also didn't charge for their services. So the transporter was bullied because he was out of the country. He was bullied by by somebody that presented himself as the service provider and bullied them in paying these invoices before they could actually submit their claim to the insurance. Sure. And it ended up that these guys made 100,000 rand off an incident where the driver died and no service was rendered from the emergencies or from the emergency medical services side. The driver was cut out, and the fire department attended to this incident at no cost, but they had to pay those services and the cleanup costs as well. And yes, the bill was 100,000 rand. Now, this is not the first incident that has happened. There's a few guys that's running around the Eastern Cape area as well. And we've had a few guys up in the Northern Province, Limpopo side, that does exactly the same. So it is so critical that we get these calls as quickly as possible so that we can intervene and we can bring the situation under control and make sure that the correct service providers get to these sites and that the sites are cleaned up and that everybody here is paying a fair bill for the incident and is not paying out money to fraudsters.
Absolutely. Willie, unfortunately, we're running out of time here, but your examples and your trends just turn around and highlight to us even more that we need to turn around and make sure that the 24-hour hot safe, spill safe line is contacted in order for us to start the process to get out to site so that these kind of impersonating cleanup providers, taxi, ambulance chasers, whatever you want to turn around and call them, will not be able to get to these sites to turn around and start imposing these high invoicings. We do have one or two questions and I'm just going to take two questions out of the thing because of our time constraints. And once again, I just want to thank everybody for having the patience to sit with us while we went through some of our issues. So the question that Dulcie Island has asked is, do you consider solar panels, inverters, and lithium batteries as high-risk items? So I'm going to turn around and tell you this week, last week I had a discussion with our Hollard Marine team, and we were talking about exclusions on policies, what they're not prepared to look at, what's their high risks, so that we know we're more or less in line and where we are. And they were saying at the moment, solar panels for them they're not prepared to look at solar panels or lithium batteries. Solar panels because of the theft. They said they've had high volumes of theft on it. And the lithium batteries because of the explosive portion of it, that it can explode. On your side, Willie, what do you feel is a high risk item? Do you believe that lithium batteries are high risk?
Shelley, yes, there's if it's not installed correctly and it's not being used correctly, lithium ion batteries will show you immediately that there's a problem. So again, it all depends. It's like putting a gun in somebody's hand, and a trained person will know how to use it and how to use it correctly. An untrained person and an unskilled person will use it incorrectly, and you will have the after effect of it. And that is exactly what lithium ion batteries is. It's a good battery. It's a good concept. It's a reliable concept. However, incorrectly installed, incorrectly used, it's going to show you immediately that there's a problem.
And we've had quite a few requests at the moment for environmental liability cover for lithium batteries. Part of the contracts are saying that they have to have environmental liability cover in place in order to transport those lithium batteries. So the guys that are importing them and manufacturing them locally have been told that they have to have that environmental liability cover in place. Then there was another question on spillage. Does the policy cover the loss of the products? Unfortunately not. our policy turns around and is triggered to contain the spill, clean up the spill, but it doesn't cover the replacement of the products that are lost. I know that a few people have asked, will the presentation be emailed to us? The presentation will be available on our YouTube channel that Tove shared the link with you earlier on. If you can give us a week, normally within a week it is up and running on that channel, so you can go back to any past iTOO presentations and you can get it on there. I saw there was one question in the chat as well.
Shelley, I see there's one from Vanessa, I think, that also asks about if solar installation should be signed off by a electrical engineer. Based on that, there is actually still not any installation requirements or regulations set out in South Africa. But the tendency is with the installation and the design of a solar system should actually be signed off by an engineer. And the legislation, the electrical legislation, actually refers to any electrical installation should be signed off by electrical engineers. So I would imagine that if these guys are, we had some discussions with a panel that is currently sitting with the legislation and the regulations around solar installations, and it seems that is going to be the route they're going to be going. So in the short, in the near future, all installed systems will have to be approved by an electrical engineer, and all new systems will have to be designed and approved by an electrical engineer.
Great, thank you, Willie. So yes, if you guys want to get in touch with us, our details are on the screen there. We will turn around afterwards and share our brochure with you, our environmental liability brochure with you. Next week's iTOOsday is an art iTOOsday, so we look forward to having you online for our art side. And then we will be doing another environmental liability session in August, around the 8th of August, so look out for us there. Thank you everybody for joining us. We're sorry we went over on time, and we're glad that our technical issues didn't turn around and lost the whole presentation, only a bit of it. Thank you to the panelists that were on, that spoke. We really appreciate your time and effort in coming in and having the chat with us. And guys, have a lovely